Hey, good afternoon, and welcome back to the Deborah Peters Show. I am Deborah Peters, and I'm absolutely thrilled to have you join me today. I have an amazing guest, as always, and we're going to do a real deep dive into relationships and how childhood trauma has such an impact on adult relationships in business and in the workplace. But before I go there, let me give you just a little bit of an overview about what this show is all about. I believe that we all have this immense capacity within us to be more, do more, have more. And it's an endless quest as we go through life. We are hardwired to consistently and continually seek more and more. The question is, are you letting yourself be all you can be? Are you letting yourself have and do what you would really like to have and do? Or have you built up all of these erroneous beliefs, negative emotions, and a paradigm that actually keeps you separated and apart from your greatest potential? And it happens everywhere in life. It happens in our intimate relationships, our friendships, our bodies, our health, our business growth, and our success. So this show is to give you the tools to actually claim that and then be able to move forward toward it on a consistent basis so you can blow your own mind and you can create your own reality. So that's what we're doing here today. And my guest is Kari O'Driscoll. She is the founder of the Self Project, which is all about enabling people to have difficult conversations so that they can take the relationship to a place of trust and to be comfortable with that. So welcome, Kari. So great to have you.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here and talk to you today.
Yeah, there's a whole lot going on in the world, as we know, and relationships are huge. I think many of us lost a bunch during 2020 and 2021, and maybe still. And I think we probably gained a few that maybe were some unlikely relationships that we might not think would actually show up for us. So I'm excited about interviewing you today and having you on my show, primarily to just be able to help people get to this place of more awareness around what it is they're really creating in relationship, and to be strong enough and brave enough to have those difficult conversations with the people they work with, the people they live with, the people they love, even, your neighbor that keeps you awake at night. So tell me a little bit about the Self Project. What is that?
Yeah, so the Self Project was actually started, it was born out of my love for teenagers. They are my favorite people on the planet. And I had two middle school age children at the time. And my background is in adolescent brain and social development. And so I was not only doing sort of academically this deep dive into mindfulness and nonviolent communication and understanding, what was happening in the adolescent brain and social world, but I was also in the thick of it raising children.
Sure.
And so many of the things that I discovered were things that I wish my parents had known about me. And I was looking around at all the adults in my life and thinking, we don't know how to do a lot of these things. We don't know how to have difficult conversations. We don't know how to stand up for ourselves. We don't know how to articulate when we're feeling really emotionally overwhelmed or like, I don't have the capacity for this right now. And so I created the Self Project as a way to help us not only as adults, but educate our kids, educate our adolescents on how to do those kinds of things so that when they go out into the world on their own, they have an idea of how to advocate for themselves. They have an idea of what a healthy, respectful, reciprocal relationship actually looks like. They know how to ask for what it is that they need. And so those are all things that I do in the Self Project. I work with educators, I work with parents, I work with teens, I work with folks in business settings, just really to kind of create this dynamic where we're actually building relationship with each other. I'm far more focused on that than on building leadership.
That's interesting. So when you say teenage, are you saying like what's the age range in your mind for a teenager?
So my work is really focused on adolescence, which runs from about 10 years old until about 23 or 24, really. I mean, if we're looking at brain and social development,
Right.
it's really a decade plus.
Yeah. Well, what do they say? It's that the brain doesn't actually complete maturity till what, 25?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So essentially you're working with them during the modeling years and the socialization years. So 7 to 14 are the modeling years, 14 to 21 are the socialization years. And I think something that we miss is that those are actually formative years as well, not just 0 to 7, because during the modeling years, 7 to 14, you're really modeling your environment. You're showing up and you're behaving like what you see around you in terms of behavior, which isn't a whole lot different than, a toddler learning to walk because they see their environment, people in their environment walking. So it's such a formative time. And, I think back to when I was a teenager and everything that you just said we didn't have in our home. I didn't have role models that could speak up for themselves in an articulate way and would wait until they were so beside themselves with negative emotion that they were ready to explode. And so it was a very sort of explosive kind of approach to being able to ask for what we wanted. And then there was this whole idea of shame around actually asking for what you wanted. And then there was an assumption that when you asked, you wouldn't get it.
Right.
So that whole thing, I mean, we were talking before the show started and I was sharing with you that I had to unlearn all that.
Yeah.
So I can imagine, well, I know because I've been coaching CEOs for 20 years, what that brings up at work.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, here's the thing. The job of the adolescent brain is to become more efficient. And the way that our brains become more efficient during those adolescent years is we're sort of pruning off all the things that don't feel like they make a whole lot of sense.
Right.
And then we're reinforcing other things, right? So we're creating these sort of superhighways in our brain so that later when we're in our 30s and 40s and 50s, we don't have to think as hard about how to respond to something. Our bodies have already created that neural pathway.
Yes.
The problem is if the neural pathway that we created was one around bottling up all your emotions and never asking for what you want until you absolutely explode.
Yeah.
Then you do have to unlearn that, right? Because even though that might be sort of a cultural norm, it's not terribly socially acceptable. And it's also not something that is functional in a work environment or in an intimate relationship, right? And so, yeah, so when we get into these work environments, especially if, you're in a place where you're expected to be on a team and there's some like weird power dynamics and hierarchies, the likelihood that you're going to get triggered into one of those sort of superhighway responses is pretty big.
Yeah.
Right? And so because trauma comes back as a response, as a behavior, as an emotion, trauma doesn't come back as a memory, right? We don't get triggered and then go, now the reason I feel that way is because when
I was 5.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
But we, at some point, if we want to be in functional relationships that are healthy with other people, we have to unpack all that stuff and we have to figure out how to unhook from that reality and create new neural pathways around what is it that I want? How do I advocate for myself? And how do I express that in a way that doesn't feel threatening to other people so that we can actually be in relationship together? And it's work.
It is work, and it takes some consistency because, you know, I love neuroscience, and it's probably one of the most exciting toolboxes that I have when I'm working with clients. I'm always encouraging them to focus on building the neural pathways they want
Mhm.
instead of trying to fix or unwind the ones they don't want. And that was my experience too, is that I sort of went down this rabbit hole for a few years where I was working on repatterning myself from a perspective of there's something wrong with me
Mhm.
and there's something about me that doesn't work. The problem with that is it's a black hole. You can always find something wrong with you. You can always find something about you that doesn't work. And it took me a hot minute to figure out that I could be repatterning my neural pathways by focusing on what I would like to be instead. And I put a big emphasis on the word be because it's the being of who you are that does all the doing.
Mhm.
And if you can't sort that through quite yet, then you will always feel like you're either not enough or people don't like you or people are out to get you. You know, it's kind of like a victim paradigm.
Mhm.
So, do you see there a connection between these adolescents and the adult clients that you work with? Do you see patterns of feeling and thinking and behavior?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that I notice the most is that what a lot of adolescents learn, not because it's said in so many words, but in
Mm,
so many different ways, in all of the systems that we've created and all the different ways that they move through the world culturally. One of the things that they learn in spades is the one with the most power wins,
mm,
right? And they can learn that at home. If, it could be a parent saying, I don't really care if you don't, if you want to take the car and go somewhere tonight, my car, my house, my rules,
yeah,
period, end of story, right? Like if they're parented by someone with that sort of authoritarian style, right? They can see it at school with a teacher that says, you can give me 17 different reasons why this paper's late. I don't really care. You're still getting a zero on it,
yeah,
right? Like when we experience the world as this sort of zero sum game, then what we learn is that the person with the most power wins. And so, as a young person who's creating my own identity, which is the other most significant thing that happens during adolescence, is identity development. There's always this undercurrent of,
mm,
I have to seek to be the person in power,
yes,
right? Or I have to find some way to be in power. And if you're part of like a marginalized community, maybe you have a physical disability, you have a learning difference, you're female, whatever, person of color, if you're part of a marginalized community, you might find really creative, almost passive aggressive ways to have power, right?
mhm,
Or if you are somebody who has a whole lot of privilege, you might just be absolutely out there and bold about your power. But
sure,
what you're not doing is creating relationship. And what you're not doing is helping people around you feel safe. And so that's where so many of our problems come from when we get into relationship after we've sort of built those patterns of relating, because that's what we learned, right?
sure.
We get
It's
out
a
there.
it's a hierarchy. It's like you're
Mhm.
buying into a hierarchy, and, I did a video on this a while ago before I launched this podcast about, imposter syndrome. I did one on that. I did one on servant leadership. And I actually did a program for NASDAQ called Women Are an Emerging Market. And that was a hit all across Europe with all their managing directors because there's a, you know, there we live in a time of a breaking down of cultural codes,
Mhm.
gender codes. And I don't mean, choosing different genders. I mean adapting to and accepting that if you're male or female, that your life has to look a certain way, success has to look a certain way. We're breaking down this coding. And then the question is, well, what are we creating with that? So when you take that into the workplace, feeling empowered to be authentically you means you first have to cultivate that relationship with yourself.
Right.
So I would suspect that in order to build trust with others in having difficult conversations and asking for what you want, you have to be able to do that with yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's really important for us to have some sort of insight into who we are as well, right? Am
Sure.
I, primarily the kind of person, like I talk a lot when I work with people about communication styles, right? Because we all have slightly different ways of communicating and processing information. Like if you sent me an audiobook right now and said, this is the best book I ever heard, you got to listen to it. I guarantee you I wouldn't, because I don't process information that way. I start to listen to an audiobook and like 3 minutes later, I'm like, oh crap, my mind has wandered. And
What else could I do?
Anymore. Now I have to rewind and go back and see where I was, right? Some people are amazing at that. Some people, I am much more like, I have to write it down. I see it in writing, then I'm good, right? Then we have people that are really super kinesthetic. Like I need to be moving and doing and experimenting and playing with this in order to really understand it, right? So figuring out and understanding like who we are, what am I bringing to this conversation? Do I have triggers or traumas that, I just need to really be aware of? And so just really sort of understanding all of those things about ourselves and then accepting them. Like, that doesn't mean there's something wrong with me.
Right.
This is uniquely part of who I am. And it means that I bring a completely different perspective and voice to this conversation. And that's pretty cool, right? Then we're able to really advocate for ourselves. Then we're able to say, I have a daughter, my youngest daughter has some sensory processing issues. And she was amazing when she was in middle school. Once we sort of figured out, what works best for her, she, the first day of 5th grade, went up to her 5th grade teacher and she said, here's the thing. If I'm not making eye contact with you while you're teaching and I'm like doodling or drawing or, bouncing my legs or like twisting around in my seat, that actually means I am paying attention.
Yeah. Good for her.
But if you force me to sit still and keep my body rigid and make eye contact with you and look as though I'm paying attention to you, I guarantee you my head is going to be spinning off in 17 different directions and I'm not going to be processing any of what you're saying.
That's fantastic.
Was able to just really put that right out there and say, I'm not being disrespectful. I'm not trying to disrupt anybody else in the class. This is literally how I learn.
It's interesting because you're talking about, how we process information and being aware. So first of all, there needs to be a level of self-awareness of how we take in information. So the sensory acuity it's worth studying. It's the key to happiness to study sensory acuity and understand how you process, you as a human being, not everybody else yet, but you as a human being, how you process information. Because to your point, you don't process information auditorily. Right. So if I want you to come on board with something, whether it's a project at work or closing a deal or deciding to go to a movie or to a restaurant, so they say that most couples fight the most over is where we're going to eat, then it's like you have no idea how to really communicate with me because you don't know how to communicate with yourself. Right. So what motivates someone is based in their sensory acuity. Do you need to see things, hear things, smell things, taste things, touch things, or actually walk through things? And there in and of itself is the key to creating new neural pathways, is understanding how your mind actually fires.
Right.
So good on her for just laying it down. One other thing I want to say about that is, and I have felt this way for a very long time. I had an experience, couple experiences when my daughter was little, and one experience, she was in a singing class, and the singing teacher couldn't control her and get her to be that rigid kid because she was very animated. So she slapped her across the face. And I was just like, oh my God. So when that happened, I had come out of an environment where you never questioned authority. It was a very heavy-handed environment, and you never said what was on your mind. So I was like, oh God, it was like so hard for me. I did it, but it was like so hard for me to stand up to that woman that had literally abused my child. So there was that angst, but it turned out to be a blessing, because I decided I am not going to feel like this for the rest of my life. It's my job as a parent to protect my child. So I'm going to, basically grow some cojones here and learn how to actually stand up for myself. And that was a turn of familial patterning. I was like the pioneer, that halted that history. And then, which brings me to my point, there was another instance when I think she was in grade 8. And, kids are really proficient at knowing how to push your buttons, right? Push the buttons in the triggers, that you call them. Yeah. And so she had this teacher that was just like, could not deal with my daughter, because my daughter knew how to push her buttons, and the teacher was reactionary. She had no capacity for managing her mental emotional state. And I had to have that conversation. So I really feel that, this is a toolbox that you have. This should be taught to teachers, to anybody that is going to be in front of an audience, which is pretty much all of us all the time. When we're going to be in front of an audience of some sort, leading a company, leading a team, being on a team, going to work, even if you're starting out at an entry-level position, teaching children, being a counselor, like the list goes on and on and on. If you don't understand that we all process information differently because you don't get yourself, then how can you be effective in that role?
Yeah. Well, and, instances like what, when you said certain kids are really good at sort of pushing the buttons, right? That is the perfect example of how they're playing with ideas of power, right?
Yeah.
That's their job as adolescents, is to try to figure out, okay, so now I know the person with the most power wins. Can I have power if I do this? Can I have power if I do that? Right. And even if it doesn't produce what you would think is a desired outcome, right? I really pissed my teacher off and now I'm going to be suspended. It still is an indication that this kid has power, right? It still gave them some sort of agency. And that is one of the most important basic psychological needs of a human being, any human being, is to feel like we have agency, right? Again, even if it doesn't elicit the kind of response that seems positive, like we can prove to ourselves, I have some agency. And so I think that that's what a lot of folks don't necessarily understand about adolescence, is that they're supposed to be doing that right now, right? But if we are in the kind of relationship with them where there isn't this stark hierarchy, where there isn't this massive imbalance of power, they won't feel the need to do that with us. Right. And it's the same at work, right? If I'm not ruling with an iron fist and telling people it's my way or the highway, I don't really care what your ideas are, then people won't feel the need to push back and play with where they can have power. Right.
True. So that's very true.
It's really important. And I think the other piece that struck me when you were talking was, and this is one of the things that I invite educators and parents and everyone to do, is interrogate their own history with ideas of authority and respect, right?
Yeah.
What does respect look like to me? What did respect look like to my parents? What does it mean to me to be respected? And did I just adopt those ideas from my family and
Right.
keep running with them? Or am I being really intentional about saying, actually, this is what respect feels like to me, and it's very different. And so then I can act in a different way, right? But we have
Make
to
new choices.
Yeah, we have to interrogate that before we can make those different choices.
Indeed. And that's the self-awareness. I think, at the end of the day, it comes down to having a curiosity, like maybe a couple of things. It comes down to having a curiosity of wanting to discover who we are and what we're really made of.
Yeah.
The other thing it comes down to is a desire to explore. I guess that's curiosity too. It's like, do you really desire a better life? And I don't mean that, I don't necessarily mean that if you desire a better life, there's something wrong with the one you have. I think we have this polarity system that everything is good, bad, right, wrong, left, right, up, down, east, west, like all of these polarities. And that's the biggest thing that I learned when I was just embarking on my sort of awakening, if you will, in my late 20s, was getting an awareness that life is not necessarily all of that polarity, that there are transition spaces, there are gray areas, there is a space between the wrongness of what's not working in my life and the rightness of the blessing in what's not working.
Yeah.
And being willing to say to myself, I choose to change, I choose to evolve, I choose to grow, not because there's something wrong with me, but because I have the capacity to be so much more of me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a learning thing, right? Like if everything isn't exactly the way that I want it to be right now, that's all still information, right?
Right.
I can start to look at like what parts of my life am I dissatisfied with? And
Mm.
then I can start to figure it out and make some decisions around, here's what I can do that's going to be different. And I don't think there is one right path, right? And there's no end point. Like we can continue to
Exactly.
just keep learning and growing and shifting and changing. Like this is what's right for me to be doing in my life right now.
Yeah.
I always joke, somebody asked my oldest daughter's a senior in college, and somebody asked her that like 5-year plan kind of question.
Right.
And she laughed out loud. And she was like, I'm going to tell my mom you said that, because 5 years ago,
Yeah.
I was nowhere near where I am now. And I never thought that I'd be where I am right now. And I didn't necessarily set out to be where I am right now, but I've published 3 books in the last 5 years. And
Yeah.
like, that's pretty cool. And do I think I'm going to now, and do I see myself in 5 years as publishing 3 more books? No, probably not. I'm probably
Right.
doing something a little bit different, veer off in a little, like, that's okay. 5 years is a long time.
It so is. A year is a long time. Look how much we've grown in 1 year. I look at my life in the last year and I'm like, it's completely different than what it was 7 months ago.
Yeah.
And that just came from a desire to grow and explore the possibilities without having this absoluteness about who I thought I needed to be. And that comes into the polar opposite, the polarities, At least that's the way I grew up, was that everything was very absolute. You either were or you weren't. And there was no room for transitioning from not something, like not wealthy enough, not healthy enough, not happy enough, not feeling loved enough, into being all of that and then some. It was like it was almost like a caste system. Maybe that's what's breaking down, because I feel like I did a show on this, a podcast on this back when I did the servant leadership. The second thing I did was on how the second sort of episode of that I did was on this breakdown of top-down leadership,
Mm,
because therein lies the hierarchy of I'm above you. I hold all of the cards of your life in the palm of my hands,
right,
and there's nothing you can do about it. So you better perform.
yeah,
And there's no room for asking any questions of what is it that you need? What would you like to bring to the table on this? Where do you see the possibilities? Like, there's just no room for asking any questions.
right,
Now, the flip side of that is, we don't want things to run amok and everybody just do whatever they want all the time. There has to be some sort of understanding of how we're going to grow here and who's accountable for what, because
right.
then you can measure KPIs, right?
But you know what? What I've discovered is that people would rather be accountable to each other
Yeah.
than to be accountable to some number on a spreadsheet or some, amount of income or whatever, right? Like we feel way more invested
Right.
when we're accountable to each other, right? And when we can give each other the grace to like, oh, that went sideways.
Mhm.
Let's reassess and see if we can figure out how to make this better, right? But if everybody has a voice in that, first of all, that whole top-down hierarchy thing means that only one person gets to be creative, right? Only
Yeah.
one person gets to have ideas. And how boring is that? Like that how is your company ever going to grow if you only have one person that's allowed to be creative as opposed to maybe 40 people who are like
Mhm.
having all these cool creative ideas and normalizing the fact that probably 39 of them are not feasible, but
Right.
you know it like at least we're having the conversations and we're building that relationship, and then we're finding trust and we're beginning to be accountable to each other, and then we all have a hand in this, and man, that feels way better.
Well, and the creativity that comes from that, yeah, okay, so maybe 39 or 38 of those ideas won't ever flush out. But I think what's missing there is the possibilities that come from just having the conversation. There's so many possibilities. There's, more trust, deeper communication, bonding, loyalty, greater creativity, things we haven't thought of yet, new ways of thinking about things that have not worked in the past that we can make adjustments on, ways to increase ROI, ways to come up with new product lines or disrupt the market with with an adjustment to an old product line. Like, it's just like this endless possibility when you get engagement. What's that old saying? You can either have 100% of one person, or you could have 1% of 100 people. What would you prefer?
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? It shifts the culture too, right? Like
Mhm.
it's way more fun to go to a place to spend a whole giant chunk of my life, my waking hours with
Yes.
people who listen to me, who are curious about my ideas, who we can banter, and not everything feels like the stakes are so high, right? Like
Yeah.
we can play with different ideas and ooh, we tried that. That didn't work. All right, we're going to go over here and try this, right? That is so much more fun. And who doesn't want to spend more time of their life having fun? And if
Yeah,
you
well,
can do
it's
that while you're getting paid,
yes, and actually grow to be fond of the people you work with. I
yeah.
did, I did this program for Boeing back in the day when they were closing down a chunk of their plant in Long Beach and moving people to Chicago, and, they were displacing a lot of people, and I
Mm,
mean a lot of people, and so they had tasked me with convincing these people that they should be happy about being displaced and be willing to move on. What they were missing was a lot of these folks had been in the company for 12, 15, 20 years. They actually bought houses next to each other. They did picnics on the weekends together. They sent their kids to school together. They took turns babysitting for one another. There was a bond there.
Yeah.
And that's the what comes from being able to communicate effectively and bring creative ideas in the workplace together.
Yeah.
Then, how are you going to embrace that and actually develop it into something within the organization so that it feeds itself? I think there's a level of, when there's trust and we know that we can share ideas and thoughts and angst, whatever, there's a level of trust and it becomes almost like a family, right?
Yeah. I mean, at the very least, it becomes a community, right? Like for most of us, the number of hours, the percentage of our life that we spend at work, gosh, wouldn't it be nice if we felt like we were part of a community, right? There's we can show up as ourselves. And I can say, I remember one of my very first jobs, I worked at Dairy Queen. It was actually my very first job. I worked at Dairy Queen when I was 14 years old.
That's cool.
And
I worked at A&W.
Yeah. So, the like scratchy.
I do. I get it.
Uniform. The whole, yeah. But I worked with two of my best friends and we worked hard and, but we had so much fun.
Yeah.
That paycheck was almost just sort of like a boon because, I looked forward to going to work every day because I knew I was going to get to hang out with my friends in a setting that wasn't school, and we were learning. We had this, the owners were this elderly Korean couple who didn't have any of their own kids. And they took us under their wing and they taught us so many things. I mean, it was just this, I'm sure they were exasperated with us sometimes, but,
sure.
We learned so much and I wanted to go to that job. The woman was a bit of a taskmaster and, there were times where it felt a little scary, but I had my girlfriends there with me and we were, doing that, right? There was a day and I remember I waited tables at a 5-star resort on the Oregon coast as well. And the staff were all different ages. There were some, that were in high school like me. And then there were older folks that worked there and everybody, we had fun.
Yes.
We all worked hard, but there were days where I could come in and be like, you guys, I am not feeling it today. And so, all right, you have 3 tables and I'll take the extra 2 that are in your section today.
I got your back.
Like pitch in for each other and do stuff. And, it was like, that is so different from, I have also had jobs where I had to literally force myself to get up out of bed in the morning.
Oh man.
And get to work. And
I'm there with you.
That was the last place I wanted to be because I didn't feel important. I felt like, I was completely disposable. I didn't feel like I had a voice. I didn't feel like I had friends there because we were all pitted against each other in competition. I don't want to spend my life like that.
Exactly.
I don't want to spend my days like that. That's miserable.
Well, yeah, I mean, it can grow you. I mean, when you start to realize what you don't want, you focus on what you do want more, right? But it doesn't have to be that hard. Like, why would you have to go through all that pain and suffering when you could be having joy? And I feel like that's really the direction of business now, is fun, joy, creativity, collaboration, and coming together and creating that community environment. I have one client that currently, it's a construction firm, and when we did the value proposition, it was all about family. And they truly are like a family. Like I have seen them, I've worked with them now for the last couple of years, and I've seen them have fights and arguments and stuff that you would think would end a relationship in the workplace. And then they shake it off, they get over it, and then they are hunkered down and they're working together and they're moving a project forward or going after new business or whatever it is they need to do. And that's really powerful. That level of intimacy and vulnerability where you can just, and we both know I'm not talking about like airing all your dirty laundry all the time, but to be willing to trust that you can be going through a tough minute and your team has your back.
Yeah. And to know that the people that are in charge are sort of aware, like, I'm going to analyze the power here, right? I'm going to see, is there a massive power imbalance, or are there ways where I can share power, right? I'm going to go through that. I'm going to maintain accountability. I'm going to, and I'm going to prioritize connection and relationship, right? Over some of these other things, because that's how that happens. What you just described, right? Like those people can have arguments and not say, that's it, I'm out of here.
I'm out. Yeah.
I'm leaving, right? Like, because there's a connection there that they've cultivated over time. And so as long as the leadership team is sort of doing that and they're understanding, who are the people that are talking to each other? Who are the people that work in relationship with each other? Who do they trust for valid information? Who do they go to? And how do we create spaces for people to feel like they can be creative, to feel like they can show up and, say, I have this new idea, or, wow, this thing happened the other day that didn't really fit, didn't sit very well with me. And I need to talk to somebody about that, right? That's a big deal.
That's a huge deal. There's so much cost goes into finding the right people, getting them trained up, integrating the relationship dynamics. I mean, it just can take so long and cost so much money and cost the company. And then just not even from a financial perspective, but when we create bonds, and I want to lead into another question before we close off here. When we create bonds with people and then there's a separation, there's emotion tied into that. There's a grieving process when someone leaves a job that they loved, but there's a hiccup, or the team that's left behind, there's a void now because you're not showing up there every day and contributing and being part of that team. So, in the title, I had childhood trauma and its effects on adult work relationships. What's the biggest? Is there any one particular trauma or childhood programming and conditioning that is predominant when you're working with adults in the workplace around this?
I think this might sound a little weird, but I think consent. I think there's this sense that we need to be accessible to each other at all times. And there might be someone who's really struggled. Maybe they've gotten triggered. Maybe there's some trauma that's happening and they're really feeling like flooded with emotion right now. And they can't actually, like, I'm not actually available to have this conversation right now.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's really important for us especially if there's some sort of conflict that's happening in the workplace, do we have consent? Like, do you feel like you have the time or the bandwidth for this discussion right now? Instead of, oh no, this is an issue and we're talking about it right now, I'm calling you into my office, kind of, because then
you're terrorized.
Well, you are, right? And here's what we know, getting back to the neuroscience of it, right? When we are flooded with that fight, flight, fear reaction, the listening and language processing centers of the brain go offline. So when we can't process what you're saying when you've just scared the crap out of us.
And
Honestly.
yeah, and obviously if you can't process it, you can't respond
Right.
in a way that is empowering to anything.
Right. All you're going to do is respond with those old neural pathways that you learned,
Yeah.
right? I either have to establish some way to have power here, or I have to get the heck out because I have no power here, right? This is terrifying.
Yeah.
So, but I think that's one of the things that happens when we've had trauma as children. If we are in positions of power, what we want to do is say, I need this to be done as soon as possible. And so we're going to have this conversation right now because I'm uncomfortable with this and I don't want to have it. And so we don't seek consent.
Yes.
Or if we're a person who's not in a position of power and we've been triggered and we're forced into having a conversation or a confrontation that we don't want to have, then we end up responding in all of these ways that are so counterproductive to actually building any kind of relationship.
Oh, God, it's just so counterproductive. So that's fascinating. Then what would you suggest they do if something has to be addressed, but everybody's triggered?
I mean, I would, normally what I say is like, give everybody 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Say to everybody, this is time sensitive and it's really important that we find a way to talk about this. And we want it to feel as safe as possible while we're talking about it. So if everybody needs to like go get something to drink, go
for a walk,
shake it off,
yeah.
go, maybe somebody brought their dog to work, go hang out with the dog. Like what do you need to do to like get your nervous system into a place? And then ask people, what can I do to make you feel safe?
Yeah.
Right. Maybe everybody gets a stack of Post-it notes and we all get to write ideas and then like post them anonymously up on the whiteboard. Right. Like,
Oh, that's cool.
Maybe that's going to make me feel safe, is to say, we all get to have some voice, but it doesn't necessarily have to be connected to me. Or, maybe we're all going to watch some 3-minute ridiculous YouTube video that's going to make us
laugh. I know.
Yeah. So something to just acknowledge, like, we're all triggered because the other thing I think we tend to do is we'll trigger people and then we'll gaslight them and go,
yes,
you know what? We don't have time for this. I don't have time for your emotion. So I get that you're triggered and sorry, but this is what we're going to do. Right. That just makes it worse. Right. So acknowledging big emotions. This is really scary for a lot of people. Let's all do, take 5 or 10 minutes to do what we can do to like calm our nervous systems. And then if there's anything we can do to sort of set up a space where everybody feels enough psychological safety to have this conversation, let's get those suggestions going. And then we're diving in. Right?
And we're not making people wrong. There's just so much emphasis on, well, then you're wrong.
Right. Yeah.
And that's a trigger too.
It is. And that is like the other thing that I will say to leaders in that position is keep trying to center the connection and the relationship. Don't be centering the solution. Don't be centering who's accountable, right? We're centering the relationship here, right? Because whatever this problem is, 99% of the time, it's not something that's going to completely undo the company.
Yeah, it's not that bad, right?
But you don't want to be losing relationships with workers that you've cultivated over, months or years, right? So center the relationship. Everybody gets a voice. Nobody gets made fun of. And just recognize, if there is a power imbalance, somebody's likely going to be triggered.
Always. 100%.
And so we're going to be transparent about that. We're going to absolutely be transparent about that. I get that it feels scary because I have the ultimate authority. Like I could listen to all your suggestions and then pull the rug out.
Cut you. So there you are being totally authentic and vulnerable. And I'm going to cut you after the fact, after you've poured your guts out. Nothing worse.
Right.
I have a question before we go. And I'm always curious why people do what they do. I know why I do what I do. I came out of this really abusive family environment. What makes you want to do this, Kari?
I didn't have a big community as a kid. I didn't have a lot of people. I didn't feel safe a lot of the time. And what I've learned as I've gotten older is that what makes me feel safe is relationship, right? And so having even just a few people that I can go to where I can just be like, man, I'm raising the white flag. I cannot figure this out. And have people show up and go, cool, we'll do it together. Let's do it together. We'll figure it out. Right.
Nice.
Game changing. And we culturally do not emphasize that to people.
We're pack animals. We need to have community.
Right. We emphasize independence and, being
bootstrapping.
Bootstrapping. Right. I don't think we're honest culturally about how game changing relationship is. And so that's why I do this work, because man, and I love teenagers, right? I just think they're fabulous, magical creatures, and knowing the potential that they have to create new neural pathways around belonging and relationship and building an identity within that. I feel like, man, we could change a whole generation.
Absolutely.
That kind of work.
Absolutely. And I think that's probably a really good sort of parting thought, is that we can change a generation, and it comes with being aware of how we're showing up, and then being accountable for that and to that, and making the adjustments on a very personal, deep personal level. Like, is that really the person I want to be?
Right.
Because then that's going to affect the quality of your experiences, which are obviously your relationships. And, it can take one out of, to your point, not feeling like you had a lot of safety and maybe feeling like you can't trust the process of life, to know that you're good. You'll always land on your feet, and there's people that love and support you. And all you have to do is open your heart to receive that.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
I know you have a book. Tell us about that.
I do. It just came out in January, and it's called Happy, Healthy Teens, Why Focusing on Relationship Works. And it really is for parents and educators of adolescents and it's kind of just, there's lots of different exercises in there around how do I unpack what my ideas are around authority and respect and, all of these different things. How was I parented, and how does that affect the way that I parent? Or, what are some of the cultural ideas that I've picked up around what my classroom behavior management plan ought to be, and all of those things. Right. And then putting that side by side with, is that the message I'm actually trying to send? Is that the person I want to show up as? And so it's really just focused on helping adults form reciprocal, caring relationships with young people, so that young people can go out into the world and go, nope, that's not a healthy relationship. I'm not okay with that. But over here, I know how to advocate for myself. And I feel like this is a safe place for me to be. And then they know how to create that for other people as well.
That's really cool. I think it sort of reminds me of, in school, I don't know if they still do it, but we used to have debate teams. And I loved being on the debate team and being able to debate an argument, keep my cool, not get triggered. It was hard, but it was a lot of fun, and it fostered something really deep within me about how I could change that familial history and be able to ask for what I want. Because at the end of the day, wherever you go, there you are. And the people that you are experiencing are a reflection of what's going on inside of you. So take stock of that. And educate yourself on how to really own your power in such a way that you're not having to overpower other people to make your point. So do you have your book handy? Can you show it to us?
I do. So cool. Here it is. Whoops.
Oh, there we go. I love it. And there's the brain. Yeah.
Yep.
Really
Yep.
good. Really
All its
good.
connections.
Yeah.
So
Congratulations, Kari. That's huge.
thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah. I hope that it's a game changer for young people. I mean, I really hope. I run parent support groups for parents of teens also. And so we do 9-week-long programs where we practice, like, how do I talk to my kids about sex? How do I talk to my kids about discipline? How do I, help them manage their health and mental health and all of those things? So my hope is that, we can create some healthier relationships between adults and teens that feel really good for everybody.
Yeah.
I think,
Instead of being an outcast because you're a teenager, you're an outcast. Good for you. I
yeah,
love it. Well, this
yeah,
has been fantastic. So we're going to add the link to your book in the show notes so people can order it. And we'll set up your website as well so people can reach out to you. This has
great.
been a fascinating conversation. Really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Yeah, I loved it. It was great talking to you. Thank you.
Absolutely. So, in closing, folks, remember you get to create your own reality through how you run your mind and your emotions and the willingness to become a better, more authentic you. So, do your homework, shut the TV off for a while, and make that your priority. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Deborah Peters. This is the Deborah Peters Show. Stay aligned, stay awake, and stay sovereign.